Okay, and we're recording. Well, Zao, welcome to the Linsider. This is episode 4. It's very nice to have you here. Thanks for taking the time to just chat.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
Yeah. So I'm going to tape a little bit of an intro before this so that people know a little bit about you. But I guess just in your own words, would you say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I was born in Beijing, China, and I grew up in a family of filmmakers in Beijing. From my grandparents to my uncles, they're all filmmakers, directors, and my grandfather was the head of the Beijing Film Studio back in the days. So I grew up in the studio. And I went to the kindergarten, elementary school there, and so film's always been a big part of my life. It was my reality, and all my friends were also from that world. They're all kids of other filmmakers. So that it was such a kind of fantasy childhood, because we would break into the set. After school's out, or after the film wrapped, and we'll just make up stories and we'll play there, and
Oh, wow.
and we would constantly be pulled out of kindergarten or elementary school during the day to do ADRs or to do some extra works. So it was a very a very familiar world to me, and just spending a lot of times in the editing room with my grandma. She was a film director, and also my uncles. And back then it was all editing on film, so you're just constantly surrounded by celluloid and steam back and ADR booth and camera stuff. So it really made me, it was no question that yes, this is what you would do growing up, like everybody else in your family. I didn't really spend much time with my parents growing up because they were busy and traveling a lot, and so I lived with my grandparents in the studio.
Right.
So that was sort of my early childhood, and then at about age 14, my parents came to the States, and I came with them, and we settled in Mississippi, of all places. So I didn't speak any English, and I always thought that like in movies, America's is skyscrapers and kind of futuristic, and it's very much like New York, LA, Chicago, or like in space, and lots of like cops shooting, it's all that stuff. But then in Mississippi, it was just like churches everywhere, and people had this very strange accent that didn't sound like anything you've heard in movies. And also, I discovered this thing called racism. So it was such an interesting experience. It was very confusing, as you can imagine, kind of a cultural shock. But I also, because of that, I learned English really quickly. Because there were no other Chinese kids in my high school or college, so you learn English real quick. But at the time I was like, well, I guess I'm not going to be able to become a filmmaker because I'm here in the U.S. and English is my second language, and in Mississippi it's like, well, what else are you going to do in life? So it was very challenging to me as a person growing up during that period in the South. But also, I think at the same time, it was challenging in a philosophical sense, because it actually broadened my horizon in terms of asking some of these big questions in life that I'd never asked before. Because everybody was religious, right? So everybody's asking me about God, about religion, about what I believed in, about the afterlife, and they would come up to me and say, "Bless your heart." Why? Because you're going to hell because you don't believe in God, and I was like, well, I was like, oh well, crap. I didn't know I was going to hell, but so it really forced me to ask, to probe these questions, and I got interested in philosophy because of that. And I was reading up a lot of philosophy in high school, and that led to my interest in physics. So it was really kind of just exploring these big questions about why we're here, what we're here to do, what is the meaning of life, and so I read a lot on that, on those topics. And so by the time I went to college in Mississippi, I decided to major in philosophy and physics. Yet I still really didn't know what I wanted to do at the time because I thought film was not possible anymore. So my mom's a doctor, so I was like, oh, maybe I'll try pre-med. So I was pre-med for a few years in college, and then I was pre-law because I was interested in politics and philosophy, and so I went through a long detour before I went back to film because I realized that was the most important outlet for me to express all the ideas and stories and feelings and telling stories, right? Creating a story space for people, and that's what I was passionate about still after all these years. So after college, I almost went to law school. And then I went back to China to work on a film my uncle was making. And then that just changed everything. I was kind of getting in touch with my Chinese self and all my old friends who are all going to be filmmakers. They're all in the early stages of their career. So I decided, I just called my parents. I was like, I'm not going back to the US. I'm not going to law school. I'm going to go to film school. So so I it took me a year with NYU, got an NYU. So, and then after that, I've just been traveling a lot and making different projects in both US and China.
Amazing. I'm so glad you found filmmaking again, because just that intro, you're a natural storyteller. I mean, we can talk about you have just covered the framework for everything we can talk about for the next hour or so, because you are every one of my guests so far, but your background and what you're doing, your perspectives, it's exactly why I wanted to have these conversations, because your background is very unique, but it's not like it needs to be shared, because people don't know someone like you exists. But I've met, not like you are very unique, but I've met other folks that have similar backgrounds, right? And for the example I'll give you is as you're talking about how you come from a family of filmmakers, right? We know that when we talk about Hollywood filmmakers, right? They are legendary, from Larry Kasdan, Jake Kasdan, all these things. So many examples. But I think the thing is, we don't hear about these multi-generational families of Chinese filmmakers, Asian filmmakers. And I think that's important to say, because then if you don't give a historical context, then you feel oh, everything that China is doing right now, or everything that we do as Chinese Americans, this is new, right? And so I think it's so important to give that context. So I kind of want to start there. And you mentioned I can just imagine the way you talked about your childhood and playing on sets. It's very cinematic. I can already picture a scene of a movie like that. Talk a little bit more about that childhood. How do you think that shapes you today, maybe?
Every time I think back on it, it's like it was basically in every aspect of your life, right? Because all the filmmakers lived, behind the studio lot, kind of like the old Hollywood system too, right? Everybody was, part of that studio. You're contracted to the studio. You're employed by the studio, and you live there, and your whole family lived there. And they have their own. They have their own, restaurant and cafeteria. So in its own, stores and shops. So it's in its own school. It's basically a whole ecosystem of just filmmakers and filmmaking. That was your entire life. So so it was really natural to have every aspect of your life be about filmmaking, right? And I remember these cafeterias where they would have people, extras, actors who would go there for lunch. So on any given day, you would have people from the 13th century. You have Mongols. you have like warriors from Qing Dynasty. You have soldiers from World War II, and you have like people from different eras all gathered around lunch tables in the cafeteria. So you walk in and it'd be like what's going on here? It's like different timelines colliding with each other. It's like parallel universes crashing right there in the cafeteria. And that was really inspiring because it worked so well on a little child's mind that it makes you want to imagine things and seeing the juxtaposition of people from different eras, different people from different timelines of humanity existing right in front of you in the current space time, right? And that juxtaposition was such a shock to your system on a daily basis. So when we would break into the set or sneak up on set after school and after people wrap shooting, we would come up with similar stories, people we had seen that day, or movies that we just saw in the screening room. They also had screenings on a weekly basis, and you would just sneak in, and because you're a child and you didn't have to pay for it or to have a ticket, and there were movies we would watch multiple times, and go back 3-4 times. So you would just come up with those stories to play. You're kind of copying what you saw and make up stories on the set, and it's just like perfect. The only thing missing was a camera. You hear a lot of these stories about, oh, so and so got a 8mm when they turned 12. Well, we didn't have cameras, but we had everything else. It was more like a theater stage play, kind of like rehearsal, and so yeah, so that was the early film education for me. But back then there were a lot of different, it was a studio system back then, right? So imagine the Hollywood studio system before the 50s, right? So studios made movies of various genres. And so when people think today that, oh, Chinese films are kind of new and we're doing new things, well, not actually true, because in the studio system, especially in the 80s, right up until the 80s or the 90s, basically before the 2000s, there were different genres of films being made in China. And especially back in the 80s, the 90s, a lot of great comedies were made. There were whole generations of comedy stars in China that were huge, that were household names. So and then there were genres in like crime thrillers, kung fu movies, war films. It was actually a really diverse slate of genre films. So I think people usually have this misconception that that they were all propaganda films. Well, that's not really fair to say, because the studio system, everything has to go through the studio and get approval, but in terms of the diversity of films, so many kinds of films. So it was just a great time period to witness, because the studio system had gone away. They're no longer in existence in China. Everything has become privatized, and so it's now centralized.
That's the benefit of the capitalism.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So like people are like, but all the films are being made today. There's a tradition of these films being made before, right? And it's just now the financing structure is different, right? Technology's changed, but the financing structure is different, but honestly, these films have always been made, right? Great content. In fact, I would say some of the, I still love a lot of these comedies that were made in the 80s, and they were actually very family friendly comedies.
Which do you have any? Talk about some of your childhood favorite movies. Like you mentioned some movies that you watched like multiple times.
Yeah, so I remember. I don't remember the names, but there were. I know the genres. The two genres that I would watch multiple times. One is the family comedy, right? And it's like these are the people who are family friends. So they lived in the next building, and they would hang out with they'll come to the house and visit and have tea. So I know who they are, and they and then to watch them on film, and it's just like you feel this connection, right? It's like, oh look, he's in the movies now, and then you go outside and you go around and he's right there, and so there's that breakdown of a barrier between what's on the screen and what's in real life. And you see the difference. You see, like, okay, in real life they're like this, but on screen they're acting in that way. And so to me, that was part of the fascination that added to the quality of the film, right? You're not only mesmerized by how funny everything is on screen, you're also mesmerized by this proximity, close proximity to the screen in real life. You know what I mean? So you're not only seeing the screen, you're also seeing what's behind the screen. And you kind of knew, like, oh, this is what happened, when they were making the film, and it ended up on the screen in that way. So you're constantly thinking about that process, that filmmaking process. And that was just really natural way of for you to ask questions and be curious about something beyond what you saw on the screen.
Yeah.
And then so family comedies was a big thing back in the 80s. And also, kung fu movies. Some great kung fu stuff that I watched repeatedly as a little kid.
Do you remember any of the actors or any of the stories?
I don't. I just remember it was the fighting was great, and the girls were beautiful, and
they were from China. They were not necessarily the Hong Kong or Taiwan action films.
Both.
Okay,
They were mainland and also Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the thing that I find, like, at some point, like, I hope all that stuff gets digitized, and like the streaming platforms have that, and there's that history, because I think, even though I'm in the industry, I don't think about, those old films, but it would be kind of cool to, besides just, we all know about Shaw Brothers films or whatnot, but besides those, to realize that there's all these other films, and to like celebrate that and to talk about those films.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially very vividly. There's this father and son actor family that they came out with this whole series of family comedies that were just so so touching and realistic. The only comparison I could make would be like, it's kind of like Chevy Chase. Steve Martin. It's like that, that kind of. It was also around the same time. You could trace back to these actors and those movies, and were very similar in tone and the subject matter. It's hard to find these things in today's cinema. In China, these family-friendly comedies, and they were great. They were just, very memorable, and it made you, really made you laugh. And yeah,
that's great. And then, so let's talk a little bit about then your childhood in Mississippi. I mean, I think what you said in the intro, what really I thought is interesting to kind of delve a little deeper is like, you said you moved to Mississippi, and clearly that's a very different world in many aspects, multi-layered. But then what captured me is when you said, oh, you thought, maybe film is not possible for you, which is, I think that is very heartbreaking to hear, and I can understand it. But, I guess talk a little bit about, that life in Mississippi, because you mentioned there is a racism element, and you mentioned that you had to learn English fast, right? So it's an element of survival. But, I think that is interesting because you went from a world where it's almost like, of course you were a child, but it was like almost like limitless and wonder to, a environment where it was like, this is what you can or cannot do. And these are things you cannot do. And I think that is like a very appropriate way to frame like the difference of like Chinese in China and how they live their life, and then Chinese Americans in the US and how we live our life here.
Right. It was really fascinating looking back on it. I mean, at the time you were just struggling for survival, right? You're like, I gotta learn English, and you're basically looking up every word in your high school textbook because you didn't know any English, right? So I would literally look up every word in my dictionary every day, and just being in a school that were just predominantly half black, half white, and then there was me. And I think because I was such an outsider that in a place that didn't really have any outsiders. For some reason, I don't think they all the kids knew what to do with me or what to make of that here's a Chinese guy, right? So nobody had any preconceived notion of who I was or how to interact with me. So in fact, they were actually very curious. Like both black kids and white kids were very curious about me, and I made friends right away in both white kids and black kids. Looking back on it, I don't think I was being bullied or I felt any overt racism towards me. Maybe there were always incidents like that with kids and just
schoolyard.
Right, schoolyard, but nothing overt really. Like I would compared to the experience of my friends in New York or LA, I think they experienced more racism in those big cities than I did in the deep South. I would go mud riding with my redneck friends, and I would hang out with black kids, and they would teach me how to rap and I played basketball with all of them. It was actually a really it was fairly friendly, and I really appreciate some of the people who came up to me, by themselves, just introduced themselves to me and made friends and invited me to their house and to like do different things and just play. So that was really great, and I think it made me, maybe I think maybe it has something to do with the way I saw the world, or the way I organize the world in terms of stories, and in terms of there's certain reality, and then there's certain reality beyond this reality, right? And I don't know if it's my own mindset or what, but I think I had a fairly easy experience as an immigrant, to be honest, in the Deep South. I can't speak to people in other parts of the country as an immigrant, but to me, I was okay. I was okay, and I think a lot of that had to do with your mindset. If you go in with a preconceived notion that people are racist, then you might find those things in life, right? If you see the world through that lens everywhere, then
the law of attraction.
Right, then you'll see that. But I had no knowledge of racism. I didn't know anything about it until I got there, and even then it was a kind of a learning experience. But I think I had a fairly easy time, getting into the in the social circles of people, and it really gave me a perspective on America. And I remember we used to go to church, not because we believed in God, but they had English classes. So I I would go there every weekend and for Bible school, and learn English, talk to people, and free food and all that good stuff.
Well, it's like the community center, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, it was just a church, It was like, and then people were very friendly, and I got to learn a lot about that part of America, which I didn't really appreciate particularly until later on. Especially nowadays, right? How do you understand that part of America if you never lived in it, right? It seems like such a foreign place to you. And in some ways it kind of is, right? People have such a different set of beliefs, and the gas price is like third of what it is in California. So of course people's reality is very different.
Yeah, I mean, so talk a little bit about so what, like the part of Mississippi that you were in, because I also, I mean, I've never been, but I've heard that Mississippi also has some Chinese. Like they own these grocery stores. It's like one common like Chinese community that I hear.
Right.
Were you near that, or?
No, they were mostly in the Delta region, right?
Okay.
So along the Mississippi River, the Delta regions, the cotton fields. So basically, after Reconstruction, a lot of Chinese laborers from the railroad construction moved down south to take over the field work, cotton fields and plantations. But because the pay was so low that they decided that they didn't want to do that, so a lot of them realized, hey, we can open up grocery stores, and it's kind of in between, like, okay, well, grocery stores that not white grocery stores, because they didn't serve the black population, and so let's open up some grocery stores, and so they build a very pretty big community around that laundromat, and they would even act as a little like a bank.
They're basically micro lending.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So micro lending before all the app stuff. Right, and then of course the Exclusion Act of late 1800 drove a lot of Chinese people out, and also because there's not a lot of marriage options for Chinese population. So, but it's still there. It's a very small community now, but it's not anywhere near the capital, and it's just in that very small region in Mississippi Delta.
Okay. And so where you grew up, you were like what?
Yeah, so I was
the only Asian kid, or were you
a handful? Yeah, one of a handful. In my school, I went to 3 different high schools in college. In high school, transferred,
Oh wow,
we
it's a
moved a
lot.
lot, and but we were moving gradually from kind of inner city to like the suburbs because
Mhm.
the school was better, and my parents wanted me to be in a
Yeah,
better
of
school,
course.
go to college, better
Yeah.
college. Um, yeah, so it went from predominantly black inner city high school to predominantly white suburban high
Mm.
school, and I was
That's
really the only.
interesting to see that change
Yeah,
over
yeah,
just a
and
few short years.
there's some Indian kids,
Yeah.
but there was only just one Chinese kid. I was
And
the only.
talk a little bit about like what did you feel? So it sounds like you like got to understand like that there's this concept of racism. You maybe didn't feel it that much, but then what was it that made you feel like you couldn't do what you wanted to do previously? There were some expectations. Was that more of because of your friend circle, like that's what they were doing, or how? Why did you feel at some point there was some things you could do and some things you couldn't?
Well, I think it's mostly my just feeling how small the world was at the time. In that it was very limited, right? Mississippi consistently ranked the last in terms of you know everything in the
Mm-hmm.
country, and
Right.
I just wanted a bigger world. I wanted to go see the world more. I wanted to experience more of America. So that was really just the idea that I just didn't want to stay there, and really, in Mississippi, the only 2 options for you is like being a doctor or a lawyer,
Mm.
like what everybody else was doing, and
Yeah, the environment.
right, the environment. And I was interested in medicine. I was interested in being a lawyer, but I just felt like there's something more.
Yeah,
Uh, I didn't know what. So I actually had to find my passion all over again,
yeah,
and then that reconnected with my childhood passion, um, and so it just became natural that okay, I took a detour, I broadened my horizon, uh, but I'm still passionate about this whole thing.
yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense because when you're a kid and you know still figure things out, like
Yeah,
you just see what's around you. Your environment affects you so much, right? So if
right,
you don't hear about certain things, if you don't see certain things, then you're not thinking about it. And I think that's like another reason why it's so important to, like for me, it's like to talk about things that are kind of like, it's not as common in the mainstream because we need to talk about these things because they exist. And if you don't talk about them, then people might think, oh, they don't exist or they can't see it or they can't get inspired by it, right?
right,
And that's the goal. It's not really, it's really to just figure out how to get these ideas out there in the world and
right,
to say that yeah, there is much more that's possible. And so it
right,
is like the next thing that you said is kind of like your journey like through a lot of self-discovery, a lot of thought, and then you came upon the realization that film is what you want to do, and then you embarked on film school, and then you made films and you went back to China. I guess talk a little bit about that. After being in the US for so long, what was it like for you to go back to China and talk about that experience?
So after film school, because I already had a lot of connections in China, I was able to do some projects back in China. There were documentaries that I made for television, some short films, and some of these were funded through China, but were filmed in the U.S. or in other parts of the world. So for a couple of years there, I made a bunch of documentaries for SMG, and we shot all over the world, and it was a great experience in terms of just practicing filmmaking, practicing storytelling, and see the world. And so that was a great experience for me. I had so much fun doing it, and also it I love documentary because at NYU it was a big part of the education was making documentaries. And I remember my teacher Rob Epstein, who made the Harvey Milk documentary. Back in the days, he was a great teacher, and it's just you're learning to tell stories. Right? You're learning to not only tell stories, that's so broad, but specifically, you learn how to what shots you need, right? Because all the actors and situations are all there. In documentaries, you're just thinking about, okay, coverage. How are you covering the scene? How do you put the scene together? When you go into this environment, how do you conceive the structure of this particular scene? And in terms of shooting, in terms of editing. So it was just and then you have to do it in under time pressure, right? So it was such a high for me, and I just really enjoyed that. It was almost like training, right? You actually learn how to make films by making films. So that was a great learning experience, and so I did a lot of that, and then my producer in China approached me. I was actually traveling back and forth, China and U.S. And I was still in New York. So my producer in China told me about this project. It was a little hotel in Beijing, a boutique hotel. They wanted to make a short film about their hotel, but not a commercial, right? A short story. So they asked me to pitch something, and I pitched a bunch of things, and I actually had never done a horror film. In film school, I've done thrillers, and I've done these things that are just, I just feel naturally inclined to, these dark humor, crime thrillers, very much like the things I watched growing up, right? And so, so I pitched this horror idea, and then they went for it, because I basically convinced them that even though it's a horror film, it actually makes the hotel looks service oriented and not so overtly like advertising itself, so that it could be a standalone piece. Yet when you think about it, you're like, oh, this is actually making the hotel seem like a very friendly place. No matter who you are, what you are, you can be that, and the hotel will accommodate. So that was the short film that I made. That kind of opened up a lot of doors for me. And I went to Tribeca and
oh wow, cool,
a bunch of other festivals, and then it won the Best Director, Best Horror Thriller at the NBC Shorts Fest. And NBC optioned the short film for TV development, and through that I got my agent and everything, and so that opened up all the doors for me. And then out of that, I made a few more shorts here in the U.S. Were financed by Chiller TV, which is part of NBC. It's no longer there, but it was the Shudder of its days,
right?
And then out of that, I was chosen by J.J. Abrams to be his directing fellow at Bear Robot. Then we made a short film there, but he also introduced me to all his collaborators. Lawrence Kasdan was one of them. I went to his house, had a really nice talk with him, and Rick Carter and Kathy Kennedy, and just all these people who are the very top of their games, and his editors, and just seeing what's possible, right? Just it was beyond. It was not just about making the film, but it was also an education of seeing these heroes, that, people who made Indiana Jones. Rick Carter made every was a production designer on every Spielberg film since, I think, E.T. And so So that was great. Just, not only in education, but also relationship building, which was also a very important thing to learn that, in this profession, it's very much about relationship.
Yeah.
Community relationships and how you maintain those relationships. It's very important. And it was a great kind of a boot camp and drilling that into you, like writing thank you notes, handwritten notes. Those are all very important. Yeah.
Do you think that still applies today now, like in our
Absolutely.
world of social media and
Absolutely.
emails and
I think especially
Twitter?
these days, because one thing I learned from JJ and at Bad Robot is that you handwrite a thank you note.
Mm-hmm.
And you send that to people, and then that's what they do, and so and it's especially important now in the age of emails and Twitters, and to actually take the time and write a little note. It doesn't have to be long, but it's very personal, and it's important. It shows that you value the relationship, you value who they are by taking the time out. And
I mean, that's an amazing kind of experience from this one short film, and it goes to show that, like, there's a lot of work that goes into it, but you never know, and it just takes this one project, and things can get going if you capitalize on it. Right.
Exactly.
I remember watching, when I got to know you, I remember watching that short, and I was like, wow, like, you, first of all, like, in telling that story, you're a great salesman, because I was like, to pitch that and to get a hotel to agree to do that. I was like,
and they paid for it.
Yeah, it's like that is something else. Like a ghost thriller story in a hotel would be like the last thing, if I ran a hotel, that I would want to pay for.
Right.
I mean, I'd maybe let you shoot in my hotel if you wanted to do a short, but I would not pay for that. And then to see that you had the thought and the awareness then to put it towards festivals and to go through that circuit, and then to submit it to different places, and then to win awards, and then that helped you get your agent, and it helped you get these experiences to meet J.J. Abrams, to get into that world. That's a huge opportunity, from this one project.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's constantly building on each other, right? So out of that short, I made Short for Chiller.
Yeah.
And then those two films got me into the Bad Robot world, and another film came out of that. And so you're constantly building upon each other, on your previous work. And then out of that, I made my first feature in China with the Fundamental Films and I Am Global as a distributor. It was a horror thriller, set on an abandoned cruise ship. So that was my first feature. It was released in China. It did pretty well. It got great reviews. And then out of so after the feature film, it was also the time when the film industry was just really taking off in China.
What year did you make that film?
It was 2016.
Okay, yeah.
So out of that, I was lucky enough to get a first look deal with Tencent Pictures, and just to develop things, and so out of that, I really met a lot more collaborators here in the U.S. and also in China, and it really, I mean, the feature film, I was really a director for hire for the feature, so I didn't write it, but the first look deal really taught me how to develop things, right? How to develop projects, and that's really valuable in terms of just how long it takes to actually develop something, to actually get something going.
Yeah.
so this this misconception about overnight success, it really is, overnight success. It's really like years of overnight. The night lasts for years, and then
long night,
really long nights. And if you look at any of these work, for example, Get Out, that script was written 10 years ago. And nobody wanted to do it. Nobody knew what to do with it. And so we put it away and started doing Key and Peele. And only after that he was able to make that. And you look at any of these projects. So it takes a long time. But also, just traveling, just like going back and forth between US and China and trying to figure out the, the kind of project that could translate, right? That could open wide, and it was a learning curve.
Yeah. What would you say is, like, on positive side, like, very important lesson that you learn through the experiences in Hollywood, and then also on that same note, what are the really important lessons that you learned in China, and what are some similarities that you see between the two? Because people always talk about the difference, but I think there's also some great things you can say that there are similarities just in filmmaking.
Right. Well, in terms of filmmaking, I was just really moved by the Chinese crew and just how dedicated they are in general. There's certain things that you can do in China that you would never be able to do here in the US, because different rules and regulations. In
also there's like a hierarchy.
Yeah, right. There's a certain
executives and all that kind of stuff.
Right, certain hierarchies, but I would say, in terms of just like the nuts and bolts of filmmaking, it's actually not that different, right? Because it's the process is the same. It's a labor of love and long hours, and just I would say there's a lot of difference probably in terms of development and distribution and sort of how you engage with the audience. I think just overall, the things I learned is just really about how to be a better storyteller. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what country you're in, what language you're telling your story in. You need to be a better storyteller, and that entails your knowledge of the culture, right? Because certain genres by themselves just don't fly, and certain stories just don't fly. You really, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what genre you're telling your stories in. It's got to move people, right? The characters got to be able to be relatable to the audience, and that all depends on your knowledge of what people are into at that moment, right? What are some of the issues? Because to be honest, the cultures could not be any more different than Chinese Americans, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the biggest challenges for filmmakers, going between these two cultures. So, while I was learning to be a better storyteller and try to find the common ground that would connect both cultures or just a broader audience, it was also challenging to actually find that and to actually bring that to life and make that a reality. Because also there's certain topics that you can talk about, certain things that you can make, and also because the politics is such a strong presence, right, between these two countries. So you're inevitably bumping up against these factors that are not related to filmmaking. That's also part of the challenge. But what I've actually settled on was, okay, I don't think I can find, these like stories that could open big in both countries, unless it's like Marvel film, right? So any kind of personal storytelling, it would have to be a bit more specific.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's specifically for the American audience, it's specifically for a Chinese audience.
Right.
So it was a learning curve for me to pivot away from finding a genre film that speaks to both cultures at this point in time. Maybe in the future I can do that again. But right now I'm of the mindset that you make something culturally specific. Might sound a little pessimistic, but
no, I think you hit it. You hit. I mean, it's very difficult to do, but I think you hit it when you talked about like the similarity is like storytelling, right?
Yeah.
And to hone on your craft of storytelling and what is the way to be the best storyteller and to sell the characters of your story. And then, I think the difference is I think for a long time, people see the money opportunity in China. And so they want to cater or they want to try to think of a cool way to just kind of it's almost like they're trying to sell a hot dog or like fast food. And that's not how it works anymore because audiences around the world and audiences in China are much more sophisticated in that and they learn very quickly. And like what you said, I think it is tough to do that. But instead of trying to pander to them, if you create a really cool story, then you just hope for the best, right? But there's like you said, because there's so much external factors,
right,
that kind of influence the process. So
right.
It makes making the films quite difficult now if you want them to work right around the world, and especially the US and China. But it's not impossible, but we have to figure out what that is because there's so many external factors that have nothing to do with the film that are affecting the film.
Yeah, what I learned, this from my mistakes early on in my career was I was chasing after these bigger things, right? These, with a first look deal, I was chasing after these studio projects. And, you would get to a certain point and everybody would be loving it. And then, and then you come up with your own take on it. You're, working on the pitch or rewriting and stuff. And then some decisions made by studios or something happens that just pull the plug. And you're like, well, shit, that's it. It's not in your control and it can be taken away at any moment.
Yeah.
And so
it's very challenging.
Very challenging. And it made me realize that, what, it's part of, also just came out of the frustration with it. Just like, what, forget all this. I'm just going to do my thing. I'm going to do my thing. And then that's the one thing that I've learned to just, there's all these factors in the world that of that could determine the fate of your project at any point. And then there are factors you don't know that will affect the fate of your project at any point. So it's pointless to worry about these things. You really just have to stick with what you want to do.
Yeah.
And push
through. You have to focus on what you can control because there's too many things you can't control.
It's just like in life, and it's just like what this pandemic has taught all of us is to focus on the things you have control over and just push through that noise. Because I always like this quote by Goethe, who said that, whatever you can do or dream, you can, right? Boldness is genius, power, and magic in it. So, just imagine, you're the leader, right? You're the leader of this train. You're the conductor. This train's leaving the station. You guys want to come on? Come on. You don't want to come on? You don't like this train? Don't get on it. Somebody else will get on it. But the train's moving. And I really think that's the way that it's the only way you can make a project happen. Is that you as a leader, as the originator, as the creator, has so much faith and belief in it and and determination in making it happen that other people just are attracted to it. They'll just come on board. It'll attract good people. It'll attract people who also believe in you and your project. So, so that's the sort of that's the method I've been adopting in the recent years. I wish that's one thing I wish I had learned early on in my career. Just stick to your guns and do your own things. But but I'm doing that now.
I mean, it's a great realization, because I think one of the keys of this industry is also longevity.
Yeah.
That is one thing that, because I came into this industry with, I don't have like your kind of family filmmaker kind of thing. But I remember in the very early days when I was just entering the industry, you do these informational, interviews. And one of the questions I asked was like, oh, what is the key to like success, right? Like, how do you make it? And then I always remember one of the people that I talked to was like an exec at, I think at the time it was like at Disney or something like that. And the comment was basically like persistence. Like, like it's like so many people they know peter out. Like they're in, like, you start in the industry with like so many people. And then because of like things like you said, whether it's a challenge, whether it's personal or work, or a letdown, or like a bad project, or being frustrated by things that you cannot control, or like a host of other things, like people just exit the industry, right? And then you really have to like, for you, like, you can hear like, you've gone through this process and you're still in it, and you've realized instead of catering to what people tell you it should be, or how the system highlights, because you got a first look deal at Tencent, you should be like you're on top of the world or something like that, right? But things happen, like you have to deal with the reality after that really cool sounding like shiny toy, and then to really like put in that day-to-day work. That's like how you keep on like moving along in this industry. And I think that's something that people don't talk about that like nearly enough.
I think the one thing that also come from my meditation, it's just like it's so important to just focus on the day's work. There's no cut out all the noise and all what other people are saying or what you think the future might be, and none of that, because you don't know. The only thing that matters is the day's work, right? Are you putting in a good day of work, right? And that's really the only thing that matters. It's this moment, and in this moment, the only person you got to answer to is yourself, right? Is this something that I care about, right? Is this something that I want to put out into the world? Is this you? Is this what you want to leave behind, right? So all these big questions in life about why we're here, what's the meaning of life, right? Just like those questions you ask yourself growing up, right? And confronted with, Christians and telling you you're going to hell because you don't believe in God, right? All these questions all come back on a daily basis. Like, is this what I want to put out into the world? And so that's really the only question you got to answer. Is this a story that moves you? Is this a story that's meaningful to you? Because I promise, if it's meaningful to you, it will be meaningful to at least one other person in the world, right? And you go from there, because what's personal is what's universal. And I think that's an important realization that I made over the years, in terms of what's the story I'm telling and how I'm telling that story. It really just have more faith in yourself.
Yeah, and I think that concept, it sounds so simple, and in some ways it is, but in another way, it's actually so daring, and I would say non-conforming, because that's not what, the message you get, out in the world, right? Because like you're supposed to like, for example, like whether it's the J.J. Abrams opportunity, or it's that feature film that you got, or it's the Tencent first look deal, that's like what the industry says you should be chasing.
Like
Right.
you're not supposed to be chasing and just doing what makes you happy, right?
Right. But in fact, I think that's the misconception is like you get there sometimes. It's always luck, right? But you don't get there by chasing after it. You get there, by being yourself, right? By being who you
Doing the
are,
work.
doing the
Yeah.
work, right? And putting in
Yeah.
putting in the work. And whatever happens, right? That's
Yeah.
not in your control. And politics and history, that's not in your control, right? So the only thing you have control over is your own destiny. And in some ways, if you ask certain philosophers, history conforms to your own destiny, right? Not the other way around. It's you make your own history.
Yeah. And in your experience so far, like, what are the stereotypes for you that you've had to kind of fight through?
This is funny because I really haven't done anything sort of Asian American related really in my work. They've all been in genre space, elevated. So one thing I encountered, which is not really a stereotype, but it's more like a kind of a pigeonhole in a way, right? Because you started out with a horror film, and out of that horror film you got another horror film, and out of that you got more horror thrillers, that genres. The next thing you know, like you're like that's what you do, right? And so other projects and other, when you go into these meetings and, you kind of talk about experience, so people automatically assume that, oh, that's your thing, right? In a way, I understand that because that's the only way that people know you through your past work and what you presented yourself as. But, I have a lot of other interests. I love drama, I love comedy, and I love these. I've never really done like a great drama, right? And I love Succession, right? So like, but you can't. It's hard to say like, oh, I want to get in on in that world or do something like that, and then people are like, well, but that you're now known for that. Well, in some ways it's true, but the only way to fight that is to make something in that genre, in that space, so that you become known for that. And that, again, all comes down to not getting permission from people to do something, but to do it yourself, right? It's back to what I was saying earlier about just sticking to your guns and do the things that you care about, because whatever prejudice or whatever pigeonhole you're put in, that's the only way to break out of it. And that's true for filmmakers of all all stages of their career. You just got to do something different by doing it, so that people know you're capable, you're able to tackle that other genre, that other subject matter. Yeah.
What is your then, because you talked about like you've done the horror and then you want to do like, it sounds like a little bit of everything. Like you want to be just free to explore stories without constraints.
Yeah.
What would be, do you have particular goals that you set for where you want to go in your career?
I would love to devote more time to sci-fi. I think that has always been an interest of mine, but I've never actually made anything in that space. But I think it's something that I naturally think about all the time with my philosophy and physics background.
Exactly.
And I'm an avid reader of both subject matters, and I keep up, with the latest development in physics and quantum physics and astrophysics. So I just, and it just seems like I'm just really interested in the bigger questions that genre raises. And also, I've also learned or realized that whatever genre that I tackle next, it's got to be personal, thematically, or just put more of myself into the story, find that connection, and that should dictate everything else. It's just this desire of putting something out in the world that you care about, that means something to you, because it's a long process. It takes years to develop something, get something going. How do you not give up, right? How do you make that process? How do you keep going through all the obstacles, right?
Yeah.
You have to believe in it so much. It means so much to you that no matter what people say, you're not going to give up.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is by doing something that are personal to you. It doesn't mean like telling your family story, right? It could be anything. It could be could be in the genre space. It could be whatever. It could be a play. It could be a short story. Whatever it is, it's got to start.
Do you have interest in that, doing stuff that's not maybe in film, like stage, Broadway?
I've been writing this play. I've never written a play before, but I'm writing this play, and it's kind of a dark comedy. So I'm reading up on all the great plays of the 20th century and just great tragedies. Cool. And it's been so informative in creating that. But I love aside from film and television, these new space of storytelling, like the VR space. I love to explore that. Theater, immersive theater experience. So I'm just whatever interest may lead you, and just follow that.
Yeah, right? For sure. Yeah, that's great. What are some things that you do to, like, you mentioned meditation, but what are some things that you do to kind of keep centered in this crazy world?
Yeah, so it's been wild for everybody on Earth this past year, and so I picked up Transcendental Meditation, and something that I heard about for years from David Lynch, and last year I just
from David Lynch.
Yeah, he talks about it all the time.
Oh, really interesting. I know that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So I mean, he's been a big practitioner.
And you just picked it up last year, pretty much.
Yeah, I picked it up last August 4th at 2 p.m.
Oh.
That was my first Transcendental Meditation session.
And, what did you do? How did you get into it?
Well, I knew about it, and then I just never came around to it, and it was supposed to be very expensive. It's like 4 days of class, and then during the pandemic, I just a lot of things are happening in my personal life, and so I suddenly felt this urge to just do it. So I called up the center.
You went somewhere.
Yeah, so I called up the center, the TM center in Ventura, and I got in touch with a teacher. And because the pandemic, instead of 4 days face-to-face class, you only do 1 day face-to-face, and the other 3 days you do it on their app. So I just went ahead and did it. I met up with a teacher, and I was there for a few hours as our first session, and then I just study up on it, and I read a lot of books by Maharishi Yogi, and then I've been a practitioner ever since. Twice a day.
How often do you do it?
So twice a day, 20 minutes each time.
Okay.
Every day, and during the pandemic, the head of David Lynch Foundation, Bob Ross, organized this Zoom meditation session in the morning and in the evening for different time zones. The guy is dedicated. It's been a whole year since he's been doing this every day, and it's not recorded. It's like a live session, and thousands of people are on it every day.
Wow.
So I do that, and it's been life changing.
Mm.
It calms you down. It brings a certain peace and perspective into your life and work. It makes you more creative. It's everything. It's everything David Lynch said. It's all true.
That's great.
Yeah. So other than that, I exercise and eat right, and I actually lost a lot of weight over the past year.
There you go.
Yeah. So exercise and meditation.
Yeah.
And actually, going outdoors, just go for hikes in nature.
Yeah.
Right. Because you can't really go anywhere else.
Yeah.
And do a lot of reading. I've been doing a lot of reading. So all those things have been just really nourishing to the mind.
Yeah. What kind of stuff are you reading? Are you reading your quantum physics stuff?
No, I always read those things. I listen to different podcasts, Star Talk, and but I'm also reading. So other than like brushing up on the history of theater and plays and Greek tragedies, I read a lot of books on politics. There's this book called Caste that was published recently. Yeah, and
I mean that book is, I think it's like it's like a must read. It's like
absolutely.
Everyone should read it. It should be like probably taught in like college or something like
absolutely.
that.
I like history. I've been reading a lot of history, and I think that's a really important area to know as a storyteller, a filmmaker, to know just our past, right? To know what's happened before, and people and characters in the same. You realize it's just the same situation. Not repeated, but it rhymes. History rhymes.
Yeah.
And then sometimes these, I'm reading this new book by George Saunders called "A Swim in a Pond in the Rain." This one, it's fantastic. It's basically, it's in which 4 Russians give a master class on writing, reading, and life.
Cool.
Yeah, so it's basically George Saunders talking about, from short stories of Tolstoy, Turgenev, and Chekhov, from that, and in terms of, okay, how do you tell a story? How do you write? How do you hold the audience attention? It's probably one of the best books on writing.
Okay. Wow. And you got the actual book. That's
I have a Kindle, and I read some stuff on Kindle, but sometimes it's just got to be the physical book.
Yeah, it is different,
right?
Yeah.
Somehow you remember more.
Yeah, there's so many ways to learn, right? It's visual, auditory, and then there's also the tactile. So with that, it's like a combination. It depends on your learning style.
Right. I think the I'm definitely more of the experiential learner. You gotta experience it.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think we're like 70 minutes in. I think it's good. Thanks for taking the time out.
All right.
And it was great to chat with you.
Yes. Always.
And hopefully we'll do this again. And otherwise, I'll see you hopefully in the real world sometime soon.
All right. Sounds good, Jason. Thank you so much for having me.
All right.
Enjoy it.
Cool.
All right.